There we go. Welcome to our fifth and final session discussing Bart Ehrman's Jesus Interrupted, and in particular today, and we don't have as much time as usual, we're talking about his last chapter where he does some self-disclosure about the reasons that he lost his faith and became an agnostic. And he makes great pains to say it's not because of all of this historical, critical view of the New Testament, and somehow he realized his youthful naivete was crumbled under the weight of scholarship and all of the things that he learned when he was attending seminary at Princeton. It wasn't that, it was the question of human suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is, if God is good, and if God made the world, why is there so much suffering in the world?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's no surprise that that's the question that has bedeviled humanity ever since we had the mental capacity to ask the question. Why is there pain and suffering in the world? And welcome back.
Thank you. We've had a little religious emergency.
Yes, yes. Various religious traditions have attempted to answer that question. And more recently, modern psychology, especially in the aftermath of the Second World War, has done some empirical studies trying to answer that question. Not just why is there suffering, but why is there suffering that is inflicted by humans on other humans? Much as we are witnessing, I don't even know how to say it.
The Ukraine and the Russian invasion.
Well, that, and people going into a school and
Right.
murdering 19 little kids and 2 teachers, and the guy in Buffalo who goes into a grocery store, and why is this a uniquely American problem?
680 times a year.
Yeah, and counting.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible.
I mean, we're not even halfway through the year.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to get into a political debate. I want to focus on, again, the theological solutions to that problem from a world religion perspective, and then suggest, if the group, such as we are, about a third of what we've had in the past, which is really kind of too bad. If that's an area that the group would like to explore further, we can, that might be a topic for the next forum, whenever, whoever, whether it's me or Heather or somebody decides, because it looks like I may be moving in a month.
Where to?
Oh, I'm just from one place locally to a smaller place locally. I mean, I'm not leaving the area. My daughter would kill me. The youngest one, who was born here, who wants daddy to always have a home base here. But no, I'm just downsizing from a house that's too big and acreage that's too much to something that's smaller and more manageable as I get older. But that means, so if there is another forum by me, it might not happen until July or August, just because I'm going to have other things on my mind. But where was I? Oh, back to this age-old question. I mentioned briefly in our discussion a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the different varieties of Christianity that arose in the 1st and 2nd centuries on into the 3rd and 4th centuries, actually, that later were labeled heresy. And one of the largest ones was Gnosticism, which was rooted in Neoplatonism, which was very popular, very persuasive in the ancient Hellenistic world, which is the entirety of the Eastern Mediterranean, everything that used to be part of Alexander's empire, which didn't last very long. And once he died, split up into three smaller empires, but all basically Greek. So, which is why the New Testament was written in Greek, because it was the common language for all of those peoples all around that arc of the Eastern Mediterranean, from Greece around to Egypt. And the Gnostics solved the problem in two ways. One of them is by saying, and again, it existed in non-Judeo-Christian forms, in Jewish forms, and in Christian forms. Gnosticism did. Their solution was to say that the God of the Old Testament, who was the creator of this world, that part they agreed with. That God is not the supreme God. The term was the demiurge. And the evidence that the God of the Old Testament was not the supreme God was that he did such a crappy job in creation. Because there is pain and suffering in the world. And the supreme God wouldn't have botched it so badly. And this is part of the gnosis, this is part of the secret knowledge that they claim to have of the truth about human existence, and that all of us had within us a spark of that divine fire, and that the mortal body is kind of an anchor holding us down into this plane of existence. And once we learn the truth, we realize that we don't really belong down here, we belong up there in the Empyrean. And that the way to escape this veil of tears is to escape the veil of tears and not come back. That's one solution. Say, yes, this world basically does suck. And the sooner we admit that and realize that we're kind of being held captive here by our mortal frame, but we have a spark of the divine, that immortal soul, which enlivens us. And our goal is, once we die, to rise up through the various levels of heaven and be able to become one with that ultimate source of reality. So that's one sort of interesting take on it. It's not unlike, and some people have said, well, you know, if you study Hinduism or Buddhism, that sounds kind of similar. Because in the major Eastern religions, if you accept reincarnation, the point of becoming a sannyasin, once you've done your duty, once you have married, procreated, raised children, so you have done your duty to society, it's now time for you to sort of focus inward and go become a monk and meditate and do all of those things. But what's the goal? To stop reincarnation. Again, which is another way of saying we're going to escape this plane of existence. And depending, you know, we're either going to realize our Buddhahood, or we're going to become one with Brahman, and we're going to escape this earthly mortal veil of tears. So that's, and then there's the larger cosmology of yugas and, you know, end of the world and Kali and all that in Hindu mythology. So we're not going to, today we're not going to get into all that. But that was another solution to the problem. So everybody's got to deal with the fact that there's a lot in life that brings about suffering and misery. And so at least a major strain within ancient Hellenistic thought and much of Eastern thought is, yes, it is And the best way to avoid it is just to escape it altogether. i.e., don't be mortal. Become immortal, however the various traditions define that process. Ancient Judaism was a little different. And this is where Sandy getting into the study of the Old Testament and how Jewish theology changed, sort of evolved over the centuries, given their experience with various invading empires and conflicts. But basically, Judaism is rooted in the idea that bad stuff happens to us because we break God's law. It's punishment.
Mm.
And so what we have to do is be really, really good and meticulous at obeying God's law. And that involves a lot more than Torah. That involves the Talmud. And most Christians go, have you guys heard of the Talmud?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. You guys heard of the Talmud? When I say that, you know what I mean? All right. Which is what? That's an attempt to sort of reinterpret the Mosaic law as time changes and the situation in society changes, we have to adapt. Right? So, and again, getting back to our discussion of the aftermath of the first Jewish revolt, once various competing strains of Judaism that were existing in the first 3/4 of the first century, once 3/4 of those were wiped out, so you have no Sadducees, no Essenes, no Zealots, all you've got left is the Pharisees.
Mm.
And that was their focus, was to be a good Jew, was to follow the law. And if you did that, God would reward you. Let's ignore the story of Job.
Yeah.
and some other minor problems with that simplistic assertion. And this is part of the reason that Jesus has conflict with the Pharisees, because he's saying, no, you guys, you're so lost in identifying individual tree, you've lost the vision of the whole forest. But that is the Judaism that survives to this day. Although with the rise of the nation of Israel, it's morphing again.
Mm.
Because parts of it get linked with Zionism, and that's another whole kettle of fish. But basically, the way we avoid misery is to follow God's law, and then God rewards you. And you don't have to suffer. Yes?
Rewards you now in this life.
Slight differences of opinion, but basically, yes. In 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, yes, absolutely. If you're a rich man, it's because you followed the law and God rewarded you for your faithfulness. And if you were miserable, if you were poor, if you were born lame, blind,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and that's the concept that Jesus confronts over and over and over again. You know, those 7 guys that the tower fell on, were they the worst sinners in all of Israel? Why did it happen to them?
Well, that's where it splits.
Yeah,
With the
well,
book of Jo-
that
where
is the question.
With the
Why
book of
does this
Job.
bleep happen to me?
But that's where it splits with the book of Job, where you've got,
Well, yeah,
which
that's part of what's called the wisdom literature, which arises in Judaism after the Hellenistic period. And again, that gets into the history of Old Testament criticism. And if you think the New Testament was complicated, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because the Old Testament, as I said, covers 20 times as much history. So it's a lot more complicated. What are some modern New Agey solutions to the problem of evil? Can you think of?
Well, there's the sort of magical thinking one that if you do not have any negative thoughts, nothing negative will happen to you. For example, when my sister got cancer, she had friends around her who said, well, there must be some internal unresolved conflict within you that is manifesting as cancer.
Mm, yeah. Did you guys hear that?
Yeah.
What Lou
Part
said?
of it.
Once more, a little more slowly and loudly, Lou.
Okay, there are people who think that any manifestation of illness or sickness is due to negative thinking. For example, when my sister got cancer, some of her friends said, you must have some kind of internal unresolved conflict that
Mhm.
is manifesting itself as cancer.
Mhm.
So eliminate that internal conflict or those negative thoughts and the cancer will go away.
She needed to see a shrink like me.
A medical shrink.
Oh, if only it were that easy, right?
Yeah, in the 70s with the new age stuff, it was like that we are like mini gods and we can manifest. It was all about manifesting what you
Mhm.
want.
And that's almost pure Gnosticism, that we are all mini gods. And Gnosticism still is very alive and well in the world today in Christian Science and in
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Mormonism and the LDS. faith.
Oh,
Various variations, bits and pieces of it, but I got rid of a couple of young Mormon missionaries when I was living in Arizona by telling them, I'll be happy to talk with you on one condition. They said, what's that? I said, pick any encyclopedia and read the article on Gnosticism,
Mhm.
and then come back and talk to me. Never saw them again. It was fun. That was how I was living in Gilbert, which is right next to Mesa. And there's a stake on every major artery every mile. And it was 40% LDS.
Wow.
I was surrounded by it. And the first thing I said was, why on earth are you guys doing missionary work here? There's a stake right across the street. Aren't there enough of you already? Anyway, no Episcopal
some-
church, but 20 Mormon stakes, and they got their own temple. Just before I left, they built a new temple in Gilbert because the one in Mesa was too busy. Anyway,
Some of my friends, it kind of goes along with reincarnation, but not the Hindu version, is that this is a learning ground. This earth is a learning ground. And
Yeah.
we each come here with a plan, not karma, but a plan to develop something in us. And yes, it is a very harsh world, but we develop whatever traits or whatever we're looking to develop, our soul, like a soul journey. Whatever we're looking to develop, it's a very good place for that. But it's so harsh that the plan is that there be the earth and various people in it will ascend to a less harsh version of that. So it will be a new earth.
that's Gnosticism. That's another
And
variation. And
It's
Jim
still
Hillman-
a real popular
that's
philosophy
why it's endured
around the
for
world.
over 2,000 years.
Mhm.
It is popular. I mean, Jim's book, The Soul's Code, is
Oh, yeah.
about that individual souls choose to come back down and learn again. It's that
Whose book is that?
you can't fail in life. You can only get an incomplete, which means you have to take the class over again
Who's the author again?
and again and again.
Very good.
that?
Rita, did you have a question?
Oh, Sandy asked who was the author of that book you just mentioned.
Jim Hillman.
Jim Hillman, of
Hillman.
course.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
probably Thomas More.
Yeah, in fact, I remember he's a famous Jungian who was very influential in the school that both Sandy and I and
Mhm.
Rita all graduated from down in Santa Barbara. And I remember he was coming to lecture. He came to lecture.
Mhm.
And he and I started talking about Gnosticism, and I was challenging him, and I literally walked from the lecture hall to his car with him debating, and he said, "You know more than the average person." And I said, "Well, I'm an Episcopal priest." He said, "Oh, well, that explains it." This was 90, 96, 97, because I did coursework from 94 to 98. So it's 25 years ago. In fact, did Hillman pass away?
Yeah.
He's gone.
So when I was at school and he talked, he had arthritis really bad.
No.
And he was in a lot of pain. And, so that affected how long he could stand or sit or talk. And so he had to do a lot of pain management. And I've often wondered with each of these concepts that we're talking about, how much, we had this discussion about politics briefly, how much one's own personality and character traits affect your choice of religion. So anyway, I often wondered that when you talked about his ideas on the soul's code, is how much of his arthritis was part of that.
What years were you at Pacifica?
Let's see, I think I graduated in 96. So what was it, 2 years? So I'd say 94 to 96,
Oh, so you and I were
give
there
or
at the
take a year,
same time, just different programs.
different programs, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, not unsurprisingly, this guy, Simon Baron Cohen, who is, he says himself, Sacha Baron Cohen, the comedian, is his cousin. They are Jewish and British. He's at Cambridge. Yeah. Professor of developmental psychopathology in the departments of experimental psychology and psychiatry at the University of Cambridge. As much other psychological research has indicated, largely through the studies of twins, that who we are is somewhere between 60 and 70% determined by genes, and the other 30 to 40% is environmental. And that depending on the environment, this or that gene will be activated or not.
So it's nature or nurture.
Put overly simplistically, yes. And basically what they're saying is it's roughly 2/3 nature and 1/3 nurture. So genes are very important. And we're almost, well, we got about 10 minutes. So what I want to do now is sort of morph a little bit.
Can I ask that? There was all these psychological studies where they put people and they took like college students and they said, if you press this button, it would cause more pain to the person answering.
That's Stanley Milgram.
And they noticed how people were pressing the button
Yeah.
higher and higher.
Yeah, don't spill the beans, Rita.
Oh,
That's in Zimbardo's book, The Lucifer Effect. After he talks about his infamous Stanford prison experiment. And again, other experiments which were conducted in the 60s and 70s and onward, but shifting. But a lot of it was saying, how on earth could good Christian civilized people like the Germans do what they did? Not that they're the first or the only ones, as this guy, Baron Cohen, talks about, for example, the Armenian genocide, which happened 30 years before that. And you back through history. And again, if you know your history, and so many Americans don't, but if you know your world history, this is nothing new. So it's not okay to scapegoat and say, well, it's just those people, because it's all of us. And that was Jung's point in The Undiscovered Self. That's what he called our lack of imagination and evil and our denying our own shadow. So he would say the worst thing that any human being could possibly do to any other human being we are all capable of that because we all have a shadow. And there are a couple. Zimbardo's book is one of the best summaries of that literature in the first half of his book, after he talks about day by day and almost hour by hour what happened during his prison experiment. And then he summarizes lots of this other research about, so what is it, or under what conditions? This is a social psychological question. Under what conditions do people conduct these heinous acts? And what, if anything, is within ourselves that makes us put on a brake? That was Milgram's experiments with how much shock is somebody willing to deliver to an innocent victim in the other room at the urging of an authority figure, the guy in the white coat who's standing behind him saying, it's okay, turn up the dial a little further. Let's see what happens. And Milgram did those experiments back in the 60s. So it's the willingness to sacrifice your own internal moral code when directed by some external authority. Because, you know, how many of the German prison guards said, well, I was just following orders.
Mhm.
So at one point you say, no, I'm not going to follow that order. Look at the Russian soldiers right now in Ukraine.
Mhm.
And some of them are refusing to follow orders and they're paying a price, but it's a small number. So moving from theology to psychology, because it's ultimately a psychological question, there has been a fair amount of research in the last 60 years, 60 to, well, now 80 years, exploring these kinds of things. What is it that makes somebody pick up a rifle, walk into a school, and shoot 21 innocent people? And more research is being done about the impact of, for example, social media and algorithms that tend to feed, you know, once, oh, you liked this, well, you might like this too.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, which breeds within social isolation, more and more sort of down a rabbit hole odd worldviews, which makes picking up a gun seem like a good idea. And the questions of how much of it is genetics, how much of it is social, how much of it is technological, which was the question that obviously didn't exist not too many decades earlier. But there is research looking at, you know, do violent video games make young men more violent? Well, most of the research says no. Okay, well then what does?
Mhm.
Because the preponderance of mass murders are done by young men under 22 years of age. Okay, so what is it that does that? And again, this is a biopsychological question. It has to do with neurology. It has to do with other social policy implications, and it has become politicized in the last 40 to 50 years, but it was not always so. But again, that's, if there's enough interest, I'd be happy. You know, there are too many books to have everybody read all this stuff, but I would be happy to sort of bring in various perspectives of what psychological research says, and we could explore that.
Mhm.
If that's something y'all want to do. I'd have to run that past Brad, because now we're not really talking about spirituality, we're talking about social psychology. So maybe whenever I move to my new house, y'all could just come and we'll chat around the living room with a bottle of wine and some cheese and talk. Oh, this is being recorded. Ooh.
Oh, no.
There, I did it again. Oops.
Now, in all of this, the architect of evil historically and Christianity, and I think in Iran, the devil.
Well, oh, thank you. Yes, the devil made me do that.
Devil movie.
Thank you. Was that Flip Wilson?
Flip Wilson.
Flip Wilson, yeah. The devil
Oh,
made
yeah.
me do that. Yeah, again, I don't have the chart, but if you remember in Zoroastrianism, you
Mhm.
basically had that, it was a dualistic notion. You had Ahriman, the evil deity, and Ahura Mazda, the good deity. And that the end of the age, the apocalyptic battle between the forces of good and evil, was not between human armies, but celestial ones. And the notion is that the current age is an age in which evil, which as it gets subsumed into post-Persian Judaism, becomes identified with Satan. And again, the Sadducees said there ain't no such thing.
But the Pharisees.
But the Pharisees, yeah, they bought apocalyptic eschatology. Sadducees did not. And as Ehrman says, it's an open question to the degree to which Jesus himself did, or those who wrote about him after the fact did and put essentially words in his mouth to that effect. Now, I had professors at seminary who held both views, and it was debated back in the 70s. The professor I took for a course on the Gospel of Mark said, no, he didn't think Jesus was an apocalypticist, but it was enough part of the tradition by the time the gospel was written, which is why it's all sort of shoved in one chapter, chapter 13, is the little apocalypse.
I have a que- I have a-
And then, of course, by the time John's gospel is written, John has rejected apocalyptic eschatology. Because by then, if he was going to come again, he would have already.
Right.
And since he hasn't, then we must have misunderstood stuff. We must have misunderstood something. There, I got that out.
Well, there was a story about Jesus being tempted by the devil. Where do you think?
That's in Matthew,
Where
and only Matthew, by the way,
Uh-huh.
which is a clue. Why is, if that was such an important event, why is it only in one gospel?
Which event is this?
Jesus being tempted by the devil
The
after
temptation.
his
In the
baptism, when he goes off and spends time in the wilderness.
Right.
Right. So the elaboration of what happened during those 40 days is only in Matthew.
The wilderness.
Luke and John don't say anything.
It could have been if it was the 40 days that without much to eat or drink, it could have been hallucination.
Oh, it could have been all kinds of things, but let's not go there. Historians can't do that. Say, well, it could, yeah, he could have been eating peyote mushrooms out in the middle of the desert.
That's a thought.
Okay. Yeah, and interesting enough, some very interesting research is being done on the use of psilocybin in treating various psychiatric disorders, but I don't want to go there because that's way off the deep end. Oh, we are almost out of time, folks. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm open to suggestion, and I'm going to make this known to Summer, who's the vestry liaison for Christian formation, and just ask her to put her ear to the ground and say, if you overhear people saying, gee, you know, I wish they would teach something about X, run it past me. But we never really got to the question, which is one of the things I wanted to talk about. What is your faith based on?
I wrote a note just now that
And,
how
and
we
what
should-
would it take to shake it?
Exactly.
Because Ehrman says,
how do we continue that? How do we continue that in
a
another forum?
confrontation with suffering made him lose his faith. Okay.
Right.
Well, faith traditions have come up with various solutions to the problem of suffering or the problem of evil. Are they adequate? Or in a postmodern world, are they no longer adequate? And are we looking at, in my own area of expertise, the science of psychology to help us understand at least human-caused evil. That we're not talking about, natural disasters and diseases and things, but that which is intentionally inflicted on people by other people. And,
So
I'm
what you're
not saying
talking
we
about
focus
is
on one
evil.
and ignore the other, because the other is equally important. And in the ancient world was even more prominent.
Right.
Because there was a lot of misery that was just a part of living, before modern medicine. Rita, what did you say again?
You're talking about evil, which sounds good, the book sounds good, but also about if the Bible is so contradictory, how do people maintain their faith? Which was another question that we never really answered. So
Yeah.
those would be the two things that I think to go forward with.
Okay, all right. Well, since there will be a hiatus of some sort before I do another forum, feel free to email me and say, hey, I vote for this. Or I may, if you like, I may do what I did last fall and, put in the church newsletter kind of a ranked choice questionnaire. What would you all like the next forum to be about? A, B, C, or D?
Have you taught all the classes here that you've taught in the past at other places?
No. Oh, there's lots more. We've got John Sanford's books looking at
Yay, John Sanford.
biblical stories from a Jungian perspective. There are lots of other things. It's 10:30, so we've got to go. So
Okay,
again, feel free to send me your suggestions, and I'll invite Summer to have her ear to the ground and just weigh them, and we'll see what happens next, okay? Thank you all for being faithful participants, either in person or via Zoom. God bless
Thank
you.
you.
See you
bye-bye. Good
soon.
Thank you.
Memorial. Have a good Memorial Day. Good, safe
Thank you.
weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.